NEFSA and a coalition of lobster industry stakeholders will be attending the ASMFC meeting on Monday, April 30th, for the purpose of testifying about the urgent need to delay the gauge change from Addendum 27 for another year. The following documentary presents some of the reasons that we need more time to determine whether Addendum 27's gauge change will benefit or harm the American lobster fishery in the long run. Please consider submitting a comment to the Commission on this issue. Comments close at 10 a.m. on Friday morning. It's imperative that every voice is heard.
My name is John Gruen. I have been lobster fishing for 45 years. Started lobster fishing full-time in 1982. It's been a fun career. A lot of changes that I've seen. When I decided to do this full-time in 1982, it wasn't to make a lot of money. It was just something that I really enjoyed. We've had good years, we've had poor years. The lobster industry, the landings were real good through the early 2000s and only got better into 2010, 2012, so forth and so on. Currently, the fishery managers, they're saying that the juvenile lobsters are in a decline. So apparently that means within the last 3, 4, 5 years, that means we didn't have enough broodstock that is producing what we're seeing now for juveniles. So what they're trying to do with the gauge increase is to leave more lobsters on the bottom to reach sexual maturity, and they'll reproduce.
The gauge increase, it sucks. I didn't realize how intense it was. They're going to go up 1/16 of an inch on the measure. When they're going to be put up against Canada, we're always putting at a disadvantage with other countries.
The gauge increase that we're looking at is going to help. In my area where we fish, we don't see lobsters of that size that egg out. And when they do, to us when we look at them, they're small. It's like, that's really not enough. They're worth it, versus what we call the broodstock, because we have a lot of lobsters that are 2, 3, 4, 5, and even bigger. Larger lobsters live down east. Learning and see how many eggs that a larger lobster can hold, the health of the eggs versus a smaller lobster. That's the key to keep this resource going, to protect those larger lobsters.
In terms of managing lobster stocks, if you look at the way we are sustaining the population, we've got a viable, well-managed fishery. But I think sometimes we overlook the importance of the larger lobster. We have a minimum size, but to me, the most important reproductive lobsters are the lobsters that are right in the range of 5 pounds, or the 5-inch gauge. Those lobsters, according to a study in Canada, will produce 20 to 25 times as many lobsters, larval lobsters, as a 1.5 pound lobster. So it would take 20 to 25 smaller lobsters to equal the reproductive capacity of the 5-inch gauge lobster. It's pretty significant. And the reason for that is the larger lobster has a slightly different reproductive cycle. The smaller lobster, having released its eggs, will molt and then go through the whole process again. When they mate, this lobster has shed its shell. The male and female basically come together, and if this were a male, and usually they're lobsters of about the same size, they come together and the male deposits semen into the female, which is stored until the eggs are mature and they're ready to be extruded onto the tail. What the larger lobster will do, the 5 pound and greater, it will store semen so that it can have 2 sets of eggs on one mating, besides the fact that the larger the lobster, the more eggs they have to begin with. So you put that together, it's like a double whammy in terms of the reproductive capacity, and that's why they're so important and produce many more larvae than, say, a 1.5 pound lobster that is sexually mature.
We down east found it very imperative to try to protect those lobsters. Where I fish is what some call the gray zone. This is the line that the Americans claim, so we can't go over on this side. And this is the line that the Canadians claim, the overlapping area, and actually it's the gray zone. And since 2002, the Canadians have been fishing the area. We see it, the fishermen that are protecting that broodstock know what's there. We've been throwing it back in the water for years. And now we have a different group of fishermen that come along and decide, well, we can take that and send it to market. So Canada has different conservation measures than the United States does. They're taking the broodstock that we have been preserving, leaving in that area that I've been fishing in since the early 1980s. We've pushed for 20 years to keep it on everybody's radar that this is an issue. There's a lot of the broodstock that has been protected for years. And it takes quite a while for a lobster, to get that size once you get up to 6, 8, 10 pounds and everything. It's our belief that by removing the broodstock that the Canadians have been catching, there's been less lobsters released, less settlement, less of everything that's been taking place.
So what I'm doing now is just exposing the ovary from both lobsters so you can get a look at even just the comparative size tells you this lobster is going to have more than this one. We'll take out a small piece of this ovary and I'm going to drop it in water because that will separate the eggs and you can actually see them. And you'll see them better in this with a microscope in just a moment. Now, I'll try to focus with the microscope so you get a good look. Okay, now, so you can see the individual eggs, and these are a long way from being mature. Probably extruded next summer would be what's going to happen with these. Now let's just have a look at the smaller lobster in terms of individual eggs. I'm going to put them in even with the others just to see if there's a comparison. These are so mature you barely see a structure to the ovary. This might be a year away before this lobster is sexually mature. This is the eggs, but they're very immature. These at least have a structure that came from the larger lobster. Whether this one would breed next year, it's not clear, probably not. But this one has semen stored in it, so it will extrude its eggs this next summer. Now let's just take a look at the size. I'm going to try to take them both out relatively intact. That's one side. Well, you can see basically side by side just the size difference, which is an indication if this one were to release larvae this next summer, they're going to be a lot fewer than that one. A lobster this size, if it were mature, might have 5,000 to 6,000 eggs. This one's probably going to have closer to 20,000.
We've gone through 2 DMR commissioners. I've had a seat under the LAC under both of them. And it's my belief that both of them were working to preserve the lobster stock, preserve what had taken off to a very lucrative fishery. The way I look at the current gauge increase that the industry is facing, we're basing it on the surveys. So that would be the trawl survey, settlement surveys, and also the ventless trap program, which I was a part of when that was in its infancy back in 2006. I did that for a number of years. I was amazed at what I saw with what those traps were bringing up and everything. My son now in that area of Cutler runs that leg of the survey along with the ventless traps. They also do settlement surveys. So what they're seeing in those collectors this past year when they did that was actually very interesting because the numbers of settlements was actually very high. Compared to the ventless trap survey, the numbers for down east anyways, for the leg that is from the Canadian border to Addison, they were poor. That's all I can say is they were poor. We scratched our heads, we're trying to think, because that's how poor they were, what we were seeing. When previous years, the traps would have, upwards of 30 of these small juvenile lobsters, and that's per trap. And this year, we actually had, in the month of June, one of the triples that literally only had 2. So we've gone from 90 to 2. It's like, okay, so what's different? Water temperature was a little bit cooler this spring, and I tried to ask that with the science people. If you're going to talk about climate change and say that the waters are warming, which is what everybody wants to allude to, if the water's warming, okay, that's one thing. But we actually know that the water temperature down our way this spring was 46 degrees. So what I was always told was that lobsters don't start to move until the water temperature is 48 degrees. Okay, so if we're at 46, well, wouldn't that explain why we're not seeing as many? You know, is that something? It's just something that, so if it's a variable, it should be at least acknowledged.
In warmer surface temperatures, these larval lobsters mature more quickly, so they're in their most vulnerable period for a shorter period of time, so you would expect a larger settlement. They're going to settle in different places than they used to. I'm certain that climate change is changing where lobsters are settling, and this is important in trying to assess what the real settlement is.
It's been a really great season for seeing settlement. I've been studying baby lobsters since 1992. Do you see any up top first? Before you move the ones that move other substrate, like there's sand on top of this one?
Yep.
And there's a lot going on there. So try to look for the one. Today, I was trying to teach Dustin how to do what I do. Because this whole sampling method that we were using today for quantifying how many of baby lobsters are settling, how good the settlement is very different from what other people have done. It's unique, and it's something that we've been doing since 1992. This habitat we're looking at allows us to capture the lobsters by hand, measure them, and put them right back where they came from, and do this repeatedly.
102.
Okay.
Left crusher. And it's our first female.
The places where you can do this, they're very shallow sloped. That's how you get a time frame long enough. If you have a steep slope, you can't sample. They're still there. They're all over. These little lobsters, they're in every habitat imaginable. They're probably out in the deep canyons. I wouldn't be surprised. Lobsters don't just live in one location or one habitat. This is a habitat you can take advantage of to look at really specific things about the animal's growth and when they settle, how many settle, and they settle, I'll tell you, the only month of the year I have not found settlement is May. Every other month of the year I've found at least one settler. We sampled 14 weeks out of the year because that's how many big tides there are. We had 26 sites that had volunteers that were consistent for many, many years. From Branford, Connecticut to Jonesport, Maine, and every place in between. We also, over all these years, have been following marked individuals. I tagged the lobsters and followed them for up to 6 years of their lives as they grew. You can't do that in the sea, in the deep water, in the shallow water, anywhere. You can do that on shore, though, and you just have to wait for the lowest tides, super low tides. You're in the Rocky Intertidal, and that's where you can have really specific data out of individual lobsters following them for all these years. We have a lot of data, but it's very different from the data that government people have, or even other academics are looking in a different way and in different habitat. I gave the data to the Stock Assessment Committee, and they haven't used my data.
Everything nowadays is science. The science says it. Now it's almost like this is my answer, so I'll draw up the equation that equals the answer. You know, instead of saying let's put everything in and figure out what the answer is. Is it science says or Simon says? What kind of game are we playing here? So
I didn't realize that's how they did their surveys, but they took 3 years and there was a decline. Well, until you start seeing that decline go up, that number's still there. You have to have multiple years to get that average back up. And sometimes you can see an increase in something in a fishery and they still won't give it to you. You know, they should be giving it back to you. You know, if you're doing a good stewardship of the ocean, and like the overfishing industry, we've opened up 2 million acres of habitat, we should be awarded for that, not punished for it and not given anything back for it.
looking at the ventless trap survey, but then looking at my own commercial traps, This year here was incredible for the amount of 1.5 to 2-inch lobsters that were in our commercial traps. So somehow they hung on coming up through, I fish basically 40 to 50 fathoms of water, and somehow these little lobsters held on into that trap all the way up till they got on the boat, and I'm still seeing them. So never have seen that before. Never. You know, again, 45 years of doing this, and I've never seen that many lobsters of that size that were coming up in the traps.
There's an insistence that lobsters settle in cobble, that's their favored habitat. Well, it is their favorite habitat where the cobble is. But things change. In the winter, there've always been storms. There's always been an eelgrass bed in deeper water in this cove. Winter storms would bring the sand up and sometimes bury some of the rocks and stuff. But then in the spring, the sand would wash away again. But what had happened to the habitat where I had the rocky intertidal from 1992 to like 2018 or whatever, that sand wasn't washing away anymore. And the rocks got buried. And then the eelgrass took root in those rocks. Well, in the lobster pound, what I found with I had all these rock piles and making all this rock habitat. Meanwhile, the lobsters, the tiniest babies, are under the eelgrass. They were in a big eelgrass bed, and they had like thatched roofs. The roots of the eelgrass worked like a thatched roof. You could see them if you put your head like on the bottom and your camera's like on the bottom, and you could take pictures to see that there are many juveniles and settlers in there together. I found this whole opening, and I followed the holes with dye and currents to see that there's a network of tunnels in the eelgrass. So those lobsters were probably never gone. They were probably in the eelgrass until the habitat converted that was higher up, and now they're there. And that's what we're seeing. Because those rocks we were sampling today weren't there when I used to be there.
We see these things and we know the patterns. That's kind of the thing when you try to explain that to these people that are trying to manage the fisheries and manage the resource and everything, that they're not seeing the select size lobsters. That's because they're not running. You just don't, just because you put a trap in the water and there's happens to be a 2-pound lobster, doesn't mean he's going to crawl in the trap. He's not going to move till he's ready to move. It's not a constant thing. You just don't go out there and see it. They come in waves, different times of the years, different water temperatures or whatever that drives them when they finally move.
And you notice they're really, really dark lobsters.
And the lobsters that we catch in the summertime, I can tell. If you pull up a crate of lobsters, I know if it was somebody from inshore or somebody fishing down below, even if they're all shedders. They're different colors.
We weren't sampling the same rocks that I sampled 30 years ago, because those rocks are underwater now. But the lobsters are higher now because the water's higher. So where low tide was before, I'll never access those rocks again. I can't conceive that that's going to happen. But as we've had the warming, we have warmer Novembers and Decembers, so we get settlement later into the season too. So if you're just looking at one habitat or one moment in time, you're not getting the whole picture. And I've been seeing settlement. I went back to another site that another lobsterman asked me, have you been and I hadn't, said I felt kind of guilty, so I went, and there were more than ever, and they were in different places where I hadn't found them before, and I was so happy. And then another site that I went to, I saw a settlement event. I saw them the day they hit the bottom, when they're so, you can hardly tell the difference between the lobster and the mud, because they're just the post larva in the mud.
Take this rock.
Ah, goodies with a settler. That's what I thought. They settled here. Yay! Yay! Awesome! Oh, there he is. Oh, there he is. Sorry, I have to help get him. In case there's little settlers. And so they're there. And they were probably always there. I just didn't have the access anymore. But pretty much thanks to Dustin, I'm here again. So what we're trying to do, what's really important that we did today, is passing that on. And to keep that data set going, is really important.
The first year when we did the ventless traps, the computer one time picked a site. I brought the chart back and I says, I'm not going here. Pointed to the chart. Why is that? Well, because this is clam flats. The computer picked it apparently at high tide or whatever he's looking at the chart, but I says, this will drain out. I'm not putting my boat onto the clam flats. So we have to have input with them, we have to work with them, and they have to work with us. At that point in time, I think there was better collaboration between science and fishermen. We're still sampling the same spots that we were in 2006. The DMR depth stratas that they use only go from basically 0 to 30 fathoms. We're seeing just as many in 30 fathoms, and of course where we fish, without having ventless traps, we see them 40, 50 fathoms and deeper. So we would like them to expand the areas. If we're going to talk about science and use the science to regulate and manage the fishery, then you should sample all of it. But to go from past years of the numbers that we've seen to what we saw this year, and then use those for a management tool, that's kind of scary. There's too many factors, too many variables in that equation to just say that, yep, there are less lobsters. Because we saw less lobsters, but then we turn around and 3 months later and we saw the most settlement in the settlement survey that we've ever seen. We used to have a program where the DMR, the Department of Marine Resources, would purchase seed lobsters from the lobster pounds. We've allocated that money to go to other programs. How much was bought before that was released back into the water that now we're not doing? There's a lot of variables to the equation. How do you tell me that we're bringing a group of fishermen to an area where they've never been, taking all these lobsters of that large size out of the water for the last 20 years, so close to the Maine shore? Because you have to understand where the gray zone is, because it becomes within 3.5 miles of Cutler Harbor is where the Canadians claim. So, and they fish right there. It's not like they're off somewhere else and everything. They come right up as close as they can. So convince me that that's not having a detrimental effect. We're trying to put it back overboard to protect it, and if they catch it, then it goes to market. So is the answer, let's increase the gauge so that way we're putting more back down there. How about we go back the way that we were? It was working before. How did we get there? Let's look at the science. What were we doing in the late 90s and the early 2000s to get us to those nice landings and those record landings that we had 2015? We're still monitoring things, but we've stopped a program that was protecting the broodstock. We have fishermen that are fishing on the broodstock that we protected, and especially down in our down east area. And now, of course, if we're looking at a gauge increase on the small end, what I would have kept in the previous year, I have to return to the water. But because the Canadians haven't increased their gauge, that means now they can catch that one. So the competition between the American fishermen and the Canadian fishermen, we're at a disadvantage. We're losing on both sides of our measure. I don't really think that the Commission thought about this, what's going to take place, when we have a gauge increase. We'll see. Hopefully that their programs work. Do we all agree with it? No. Do we all disagree? No. Do I support it? No, I don't support it. I think we're fine with the size that we have. I still believe that the larger lobsters are the key. I don't envy any fisheries manager, such as the Commissioner of the Marine Resources, in making those decisions. Currently, we've got some great people advocating for more data, whichever measure that we need to go, either through Maine Lobstermen Associations or through the New England Fishermen Stewardship Association, the MLU, the Down East Lobstermen Association. Everybody, I think, is got the same mindset. I think we've got some really good people that are advocating for not just lobster fishermen, but for all fishermen.
If you found the information in this documentary to be compelling, please submit a comment to the ASMFC before 10 a.m. Friday morning, urging them to delay the gauge change.